Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, HR's Best Kept Secret: Contingent Workers Are the Key to a Resilient Workforce, sponsored by Eightfold. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. You will receive an email from hr.com within 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information. You may also log in to your account and view the credits that you have received. If you have any questions during the webcast, please click on Q&A in your webinar controls and type them in. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Carly Ackerman.
Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We're really excited for today's conversation. I'm Carly Ackerman, and I'm the Director of Customer Experience at Eightfold AI. Sonia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Khan, and I'm the Chief Economist at Eightfold AI. Excited to talk to you all about contingent workers today.
Well, I'm a former teacher, so I'm here to start us on a pop quiz. So we have our first question here for everybody right out of the gate. Of your total workforce, what percentage is made up of contingent workers? We have 5 options here: less than 10%, 11 to 24, 25 to 50, greater than 50, and I'm not sure. So while you're taking a moment to answer this question, Sonia, pop quiz for you. Let's level set. What do we mean by contingent workers, and what kinds of work do we typically see contingent workers doing for organizations?
So contingent workers are also known as temporary, contract, freelancers, consultants, independent workers, or 1099 workers. It's any of the above that you might have heard of. These workers usually lend their skills and expertise to businesses on a project-by-project basis or a short-term basis. So although you might have heard of gig workers, and they technically fall into this category, they're usually part of the platform economy, as we call it. So just an FYI that our analysis doesn't focus on them specifically.
That was an aha moment for me, I know, when we were preparing for this. So I really appreciate the additional context. All right, so it looks like the vast majority of folks are saying less than 10%. We've got a shortly followed after that by 11 to 24%. So I would say between 0 and a quarter of the workforce is typically, from this group at least, being made up of contingent workers. So let's talk a little bit about where you all fall as it relates to some of the research that we've been seeing, and potentially where you might end up this year. So taking a step back here, I want to talk about what's happening in the talent market. I'm actually sick of hearing myself talk about the pandemic, but it's important to note that it did bring both pain and progress to the work world. First, many employers learned that remote work was not only possible, but it was actually super effective in terms of both outcomes and reducing costs. And second, employees realized that they actually have choices, and that permanent roles in offices don't have to be the only way to go. I'll speak for myself, and I know I have compatriots out there. I'm feeling very webinar ready from the waist up, but I'm definitely rocking yoga pants off screen. So with some of that flexibility of where we work, also came the understanding that we have some flexibility about how we work. With the changes we're seeing in the market right now, a lot of this seems to be in reaction to some overhiring that happened last year, especially for full-time and permanent roles. And let me say, I am super bummed for folks who've lost their jobs recently. But what I'm sure you're not surprised to see is that most organizations still have hiring needs. Sonia, anything to add here?
Yeah, just wanted to add a couple more recent interesting labor market statistics that might change the way that you think about the overall labor market. So, of course, you've heard of layoffs. And despite the Fed's aggressive interest rate hikes, the overall labor market is still very strong. So last month, we added 517,000 jobs last month. That stat came out on Friday and kind of blew every economist's mind. The other good news is that despite the tech and finance layoffs that we've been hearing all about, there is demand for talent in other industries, and they're hiring quite a bit. So job openings are still historically elevated levels. Hiring in the overall economy is only down 0.3% over the year from last December 2021, according to the JOLTS report from the BLS. And so although some sectors are facing cuts, and you've heard quite a bit about them, we're finding that others are still experiencing labor shortages and elevated hiring levels. So it's not all doom and gloom, and there are other industries that we should be focusing on as well.
What I found particularly interesting is to see this uptick in contingent hiring, and that companies are and actually have been seeing contingent talent as a means of creating more flexible and dynamic workforces. And contingent workers are getting tapped to do everything from backfilling roles, testing new roles, even stepping in while companies reevaluate their workforce and determine if and maybe even when they want to convert a contractor to a full-time employee. So this is really exposing organizations to broader talent pools, including those they might not have previously entertained, which is really exciting. What we're seeing is what we refer to as a shift toward elasticity. And I'm going to leave most of the data up to Sonia. She is the chief economist after all, but I will share, I had the opportunity to take a look at the HR.com State of Contingent Work report. And they found that when looking out 2 years, 36% of respondents say contingent spending will increase, while far fewer, about 17%, indicate it will decrease. And 47% are actually predicting it will stay the same. So we really do think contingent work is here for the long haul. Also, in a recent blog that featured Sonia, our research suggested that contingent workforce is projected to grow by 53% worldwide. And I know Sonia will touch on that a little bit more. And today, according to McKinsey, 36% of the workforce self-identifies as independent workers. So Sonia, before we get into even more rich data here, I'd love to hear your articulation of talent elasticity and what does it mean? Why is it important? Just help us understand. It is I think it's a new and upcoming term.
Sure. Yeah. So I like to think of elasticity as a rubber band, right? So if you have an inelastic workforce, you're likely to be unable to expand or shrink as you need it. You can't really move that rubber band around much. But if you have an elastic workforce, you're able to expand when your needs grow or your organization is in a growth phase, perhaps shrink when you are weary of costs. In either case, a contingent worker is the key to talent elasticity.
Awesome. So we're all going to try to be a little bit more flexible. All right, let's get into our next poll. What parts of the organization do contingent workers support? And that's for you, not, what do you think, but tell us what's happening for you. And again, Sonia, I'm going to pass a quiz over to you. We've talked a lot in prepping for this about changing organizations' perspectives on contingent work. And I know your research has revealed some really interesting trends about who actually makes up the contingent workforce. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the myth busting you've been doing with your research?
Sure, yeah. So one of the most surprising things we found in our research of contingent workers was that they're not just the typical seasonal or gig workers that you usually think of, but they cut across all education levels and all incomes. So we found that a greater proportion of contingent workers have more than 10 years of experience, hold mid-level or executive level positions, graduate degrees, and high-paying college majors. So it's not what we usually were thinking of in the past with contract workers. And we also found that more high-level workers are choosing to be contract workers rather than full-time employees. So that's an interesting change to give up that flexibility of full-time work, which begs the question of whether their decision is due to flexibility or perhaps employee experience, or perhaps even return to office policies. That's something that I think we'll focus on next in our research, but something to think about for all HR professionals, I think.
All right, let's see the answers to these questions. Wow. Okay. So just over half of our folks on the line have contingent workers deployed cross-functionally. Then we see IT and tech at 28% and HR or operations at 14%. Super interesting. All right, let's keep moving. Sonia, I think I'm going to turn it to you.
Okay, sounds good. So here you can see that we're predicting a growth in contingent workforce participation in the future. The black dots represent the US and the white dots represent a global increase. So in 2023, we're seeing a 26% increase in the United States and a 53% increase globally. We think that this is due to two main reasons. Of course, economic uncertainty in the near future, but also the need for immediate talent as the labor shortage persists. And we're thinking as economists that it's likely to persist for a while. So companies are shifting to a more agile workforce with contingent workers, partially because of the unprecedented labor shortages we're experiencing. There's a massive opportunity for companies to change the way that they hire and retain talent. For example, they can call in specialized help on an as-needed basis when the need for specific expertise or a specific job is required, but that company might not be ready for a full-time hire or a full-time salary. So they can lean on that contingent workforce in the meantime. Here are the top 10 titles held by contract workers globally. We've pulled this out of our research, and you can see it ranges from a variety of different departments, ranging from software and web developers, recruiters, project managers, business analysts, marketing-related occupations, technical writers, scrum master, graphic designer, maintenance-related occupations, and management specialists. So yeah, again, this indicates that the skills of contingent workers are specialized and can vary widely. And I thought that this list was really eye-opening because it once again indicates that contingent workers aren't those typical hourly workers from previous decades. They're highly skilled, and vary across departments and also across education levels and incomes. So I'll get to that part next.
What I find really interesting about this, just given the answers to the previous poll, it seems like we're all kind of circling around the same set of concepts, right? Folks can be deployed cross-functionally. There's a variety of different ways that we can leverage contingent workers. And start to see some impact perhaps in places that are not historically places where we would insert a contractor.
Okay, so like I mentioned, our research indicated that these workers cut across all ages, education levels, and incomes. And it really comes down to the increased flexibility and adaptability of the worker. So in terms of experience, in 2022, the proportion of workers with less than 5 years of experience fell by half, and the proportion of workers having more than 10 years of experience increased by 2/3. That's pretty eye-opening, I thought. So now we're kind of changing from less experienced contingent workers to more experienced contingent workers. Additionally, in terms of education, we've found that globally 54% of contingent workers have a college degree and 31% finish graduate school, according to our research. So that's globally. And then US, we had similar percentages, but we found that roughly 7% held a doctorate degree. So again, varying across education levels. And so if you think about it, for instance, if a firm has an influx of work or a complex project is presented, contingent labor offers a flexible, on-demand hiring basis, particularly in a tight labor market where it might be difficult to find the right talent. And utilizing contract workers really provides employers with greater flexibility and management flexibility as well. And then in terms of gender, we found that the proportion of females in the contingent workforce fell in 2020 and 2021. But we found that in 2022, the proportion of females increased again to 46%. So making up half of all contingent workers, roughly half. We're thinking that that percentage of females fell in 2020 and 2021 because of the pandemic and the need to take care of either children or elder care and had to drop out of the workforce. I also think it's a great contingent workers is a great option for women who are going to be getting back into the workforce. It allows you the flexibility to decide how, where, and when you'd like to work, and the hours you'd like to work and can work as well.
I had a couple of reactions to reviewing this slide. The first one around education, seeing that the level of education is kind of creeping up within the contingent workforce. Again, as a former teacher, I kind of teased that earlier. This isn't a question so much as just a reaction, right? I'm starting to think, what is the impact for individuals with high school degrees, right, who are trying to enter the workforce? I spent a lot of time in the special education classroom, particularly. So thinking about individuals for whom higher education isn't really an option. So I'd be kind of interested to dig into the impact of the rise of contingent labor on that particular population. And equally with women in the workforce, I think it's really interesting to see the impact on women who are participating in the workforce in a variety of ways as organizations shift to more skills-based hiring and skills-based deployment. Just narrowing or helping individuals see themselves in roles by way of showing them their potential versus simply kind of putting a job description out there that might not necessarily resonate with somebody who doesn't have X, Y, and Z prescriptive experience. So I think it's a really interesting time for some of these populations in the workforce.
Yeah, just to add to that as well. So numerous studies also show that taking time off from a career can hurdle the majority of employees, particularly women, and that re-entry into the workforce can be arduous. So contingent workers, like I said, allows females to return to the workforce, learn those skills that you just talked about, or remain in the workforce without having to leave in the first place at all. So it gives you all of that type of flexibility.
This is an actual question, curiosity. Are internships and apprenticeships considered contingent, part of the contingent workforce, or can they be?
They are not. I think you have a separate category for that. And then our research also didn't include them in it because it's a different category of worker for us.
Fair enough.
So speaking about skills, here is something that I created. Here's a list of how you can use skill adjacencies to expand your talent pool. So this isn't necessarily just for contingent workers, but I thought it was so interesting. This is what my team does at Eightfold. And so I wanted to highlight this as well. So if you look at the blue or turquoise bubbles, those are a list of declining skills. And then if you look at the green rising skill, that's cloud computing in this case. So if we take cloud computing as an example of a top skill, it's a rising skill that's very high in demand in our workforce, and it's also hard to find. So we can use the idea of skill adjacencies to expand the search for talent. And what that really means is focus on the skills that are in blue on the left. They are adjacent or similar to cloud computing. And according to Eightfold's analysis, we're confident that the people who have those blue skills, like solution architecture, visualization, high integration, or cloud security, can learn that top skill of cloud computing pretty easily. So if we start to look for talent with those who have declining skills, then we'll be able to expand our talent pool significantly. So on the right over there, I have 0.9 million people have the skill of cloud computing in the US. So that sounds like a lot, but it doesn't meet our needs. Yet, if you open the pool to also include those blue skills, then 2.1 million have the potential to learn the cloud computing skill. And thereby, the talent pool expands 3.1% when you hire for potential. So it's a really big increase. And I think this is a really neat thing that we can start to utilize in this time of a labor shortage and a difficulty in finding the right person with the right skills.
Yeah, this is what I love about the idea of hiring for potential. And I think what you said that by seeking out individuals who have some of the skills on the left-hand side, the declining skills, that you're identifying individuals who can learn the skill on the right. I think that there's probably even more individuals who can learn cloud computing. What's even more interesting to me is that the people on the left are the ones who can do it quickly, right? The ones who are not going to cost you additional training costs, right? You obviously you'll have to train them on those skills, but the gap between today and tomorrow is much smaller for that population. And this is not just, I think the tech industry and the tech space is the cool place to look at these adjacencies, but they exist everywhere. This is not just a tech phenomenon. So as you can see, I get fired up when we start talking about skills. And this shift to skills-based hiring, whether it's in the context of a full-time employee or contingent workers, it's going to be critical to achieving that talent elasticity that we introduced earlier. So what we encourage our clients to do is think about what you really need. Is it a one-for-one backfill? Do you really need to replace that one person with another single person in the same exact context? What are the skills that are most important to the role or to the job? Is the work consistent? Do you see it lasting for over time? Could you use a contractor to get the work done while you're kind of reevaluating your workforce strategy in terms of what your workforce will comprise of over time? Are you in a position where you can tap into talent with adjacent skills like the ones we were just looking at to get the work done? It's probably been 5 or more years since we slipped into this world in which disruption is just the norm. I think other than talking about the pandemic, maybe disruption is the next word that I'd like to banish from my own vocabulary. But we have to be able to scale up and down, even when hiring is frozen, even when budgets are cut, even when economic conditions are super tenuous. And becoming more skills-based is going to help organizations do more with less, especially when it becomes increasingly difficult to avoid things like backfills, or you don't necessarily want to just shift more work to your existing employees. So breaking the work down into skills requirements, by doing that, you'll be able to evaluate your talent, anyone who can be shifted based upon their skills and their potential within your existing workforce. But you'll also be able to work more strategically with your vendors, exploring if they have more capacity maybe to do what you need while accruing minimal, if any, additional costs. Your vendors are the group that can hire or deploy workers for a defined period of time or a specific set of skills to meet a business need or to fill a critical skill gap. What's another interesting use case for contingent workers is we've seen organizations testing out new roles, maybe something that they're not sure is going to last very long. Maybe they have some sort of innovation initiative, and contingents give them the ability to provide a really great option for kicking the tires on these test roles. And when the test roles are successful, that might actually even lead to full-time opportunities for your contractors. So you can see how the elasticity kind of or the flexibility, not only within expanding and contracting your workforce, but the types of roles that you're tapping into for individuals. And you really don't have to compromise business priorities or innovation. You can quickly pivot as needed based upon the really precise skill requirements of the work at hand. I really like this idea of breaking down work into skills versus into jobs. I think that's an interesting space. I think I want to talk about it a little bit more as we progress here, but just keep in mind, work can be broken down into the pixels of skills that are required to get it done. So we're very excited, obviously, about contingent hiring, but we know there are challenges involved with building a contingent hiring strategy. Sometimes contingent hiring is an afterthought. It can become disconnected from the broader talent acquisition strategy, maybe even the broader HR strategy. It can also become disconnected from the broader employee engagement strategy. The danger of that is that it can lead to issues around culture and inclusion within your workforce. Accessing candidates through staffing agencies can be really expensive. Staffing agencies typically submit all their candidates, and that can also make for unpredictable outcomes in terms of who you get assigned to a project. So you don't really know, or you don't really have a great visibility into who's going to get assigned to a project. And if you're dependent on a variety of specialty agencies, maybe this can even slow things down more. There's also we've seen a lack of communication amongst stakeholders. So when the workforce strategy is kind of distributed across different parts of the organizations, stakeholders in different departments might have limited visibility into how the contingent program is performing. So even they might have disjointed perspectives of what is needed and where we need to contract versus expand our contingent workforce. Again, also in the HR.com State of Contingent Work Report, there are a variety of other challenges mentioned, including managing contingent worker performance levels. So that's more on the individual performance management basis. Ensuring contingent workers are engaged. So as I mentioned earlier, making sure that they're feeling included in the overarching engagement strategy, and training and onboarding. I think that's a challenge for all types of workforce, but particularly for your contingent workforce, making sure they're getting everything that they need from mandatory compliance and regulatory types of training to just standard onboarding from a technology perspective or from a corporate culture perspective, and then more of that ongoing training throughout the stint of their stay with the organization that they're supporting. Sonia, before we share with folks, the next steps and the types of things they can do to tackle some of these challenges, do you mind taking us to our next poll?
Yeah, sounds great. Okay, so poll number 3 is, in 2023, how is contingent hiring ownership changing in your organization? And it looks like we have 6 choices here. So either shifting towards a shared model, staying with or shifting to procurement, staying with or shifting to HR or talent acquisition, staying with or shifting to finance, or you're just exploring contingent workforce and haven't decided where it will live, or that you don't have a contingent workforce strategy and you probably won't create one this year. And while you guys are picking your option, I'll ask Carly, with organizations that you've worked with in the past, where have you seen contingent hiring sitting?
So I've seen pretty much the whole gamut, but I spend most of my time with large financial services organizations. And in that setting, procurement typically leads contingent hiring. And what I have found, because my consulting experiences with HR, is that procurement's goals don't always line up with HR's goal, let alone talent acquisition's goals. Procurement's goals are more business and cost efficiency focused, and they care about things like eliminating excess spending and driving savings, achieving sustained cost reduction and mitigating risk. They hate risk, maintaining business continuity and efficiency, and then ramping the workforce as needed, hiring and letting go of resources easily as cycles, projects, and priorities shift. And I find that can be a bit more of a transactional approach to people management, perhaps, than HR might be comfortable with, depending upon where you are. And these kinds of focus areas can lead to some organizational challenges. And that might include things like too much of a focus on the short-term spending versus longer-term business goals, right? When you lose sight of the bigger picture and what's to come, you might kind of stumble on your workforce strategy in the longer term. Diversity hiring issues can pop up. And the lack of communication amongst stakeholders in different departments leads to just different velocity of outcomes and different levels of disappointment, frankly, when those two parties are not necessarily communicating effectively about the real business needs that need to be filled by the contingent workforce. So recently I've actually seen a swing back toward HR owning contingent hiring, but I'd love to see what this group said.
Oh, interesting. So we had the majority of people, 38%, staying with or shifting to HR or talent acquisition. So interesting. Awesome. Below that, 20% was they don't have a contingent workforce strategy and probably won't create one this year. So that's shocking. I hope that this presentation changes that quite a little bit, at least.
And I'm seeing, I know we have a couple of questions that we need to answer in the Q&A, but I did see at least one person say the options don't necessarily apply to their organization because they're more on a seasonal basis.
Got it.
All right, so here's where we start to shift into what can you do about this? People and legacy processes can't keep up with the constant market changes and high demands. I mentioned the D word earlier, disruption, right? It's really hard for us to continue to tap into our old ways of doing things and to see new results. The good news is there are super powerful tools. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about AI tools and what Sonia and I refer to as talent intelligence, a whole new category of technology that's helping organizations unleash their contingent talent. With technology, organizations can ensure roles are filled with the right contingent worker, with the right set of skills and the right experience at the right time. Specifically, deep learning AI helps leaders create this 360-degree comprehensive view of the entire workforce. And that doesn't just include their existing workforce, but it also includes their external talent network, anybody who they've ever engaged, whether it was through the interview process, at a campus hiring event, right? Like anybody who's ever touched the organization, they actually have access to that data and they're able to see over time, maybe there's somebody who we overlooked in the past who we might want to pull back in. They're able to access candidate matching information that they can actually explain, why did this person get matched to this particular role or job or piece of work? And that can increase the quality of hiring and support some really informed data-driven decision-making. There's also a variety of integrated and automated engagement tools. And with those types of tools, contingent recruiters end up spending more time sourcing candidates and less time on the manual back office Excel-driven work. And I realize that many of these options and things may sound like just kind of waving a magic wand, but let me share a story of an organization that has leaned all the way into AI as an accelerator for their contingent talent strategy. Before I do that, Sonia, anything to add here?
No, just wanted to mention, when you're talking about matching candidates to the right work and you get a percentage of how great this candidate is for this role, like it's a 56% match. And why is it a 56% match? And on the flip side, I think if candidates can also see something similar to that, which they can in their view, but it makes them more likely to apply to that job, right? As women, there's studies that say unless you hit all 100% of the bullets, that you won't apply to the job. And here we are, and we're telling you exactly why you're a good match, even though you might not hit every single point. This AI system can tell you what your skills are based, even if you didn't explain them in your resume, and can assume what they are and give you a percentage match and why you're a good match. So you're more likely to actually go out of your comfort zone and apply to that job that you wouldn't have necessarily otherwise. So just looking at it from the employee angle here, but it's a win-win, I think, for both candidates and employers.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned earlier how the contingent roles can be a foray back into the workforce for somebody who's taken a step back. So I'm just imagining a scenario where somebody who's been out of the workforce for a couple of years applies to a role that they're not necessarily a match for, but they're also exposed to a variety of other roles that they hadn't considered, and say,
Right.
you know, this might be my baby step back into the workforce, and I hadn't even considered it. I just thought I'd jump right back in where I was before.
Right. And it's really interesting. I've played around with it quite a bit, and I've seen, okay, well, what are my possibilities that I can go down with the skills that I have today? And it's not just, your typical economist ones that I had always been thinking of, but they range from like a wide array of different departments. And then actually, another part of our platform shows what steps you need to take to get to that other department or that other role. Like maybe I want to switch over all the way to marketing. It's like, what things do I need to do what courses do I need to take, or what skills do I need to learn in order to get there? And so it gives you like a game plan for your career almost. And I think that's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, what better way to do it than without the full strings of full-time employment?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I'd mentioned I wanted to share a quick story, and this is Dolby Laboratories' contingent talent journey. And I really loved listening to Alan Kumar talk about his organization's contingent journey. We'd be actually happy to share the YouTube link after this call. You can probably just Google it. But his perspective is that the days of working for a company for 30 years are gone. They've probably been gone for a while. But that's kind of how he jumped into this and the lens he brought to the challenge. Dolby is now using AI automation and candidate relationship management to build talent pools that they can tap into on demand. So thinking about flexibility and elasticity, they have this very broad talent pool that they can tap into if and when they need it. If a short-term business requirement rises, they have access to a very large base that they can pull from. And Alan actually gave this great example. I'm not sure if it happened or if it was just a really good storytelling, but I'm going to share it. He spoke about a situation where an all-star senior marketing manager wasn't ready to join Dolby full-time. But Dolby dreamed up a scenario where this person could get involved with a branding initiative with The Weeknd and Justin Bieber, if there are fans out there. And that provided this person with an awesome opportunity that was well aligned with their skills and experience. And it created this employer brand stickiness so that maybe this person will participate again as a contingent worker in the future, or maybe they'll actually want to join full-time at some point. But either way, Dolby created an opportunity to leverage top talent for a very specific niche purpose, creating that brand loyalty for somebody who easily could provide additional value to this business in the future. So you can see here, even with his quote, right? When you choose one candidate for a role, the 99 folks who you did not choose, who went through the interview process, are not bad options. So it's really great to still be able to have access to those individuals and to tap into them when maybe you don't have a full-time opportunity. But as Alan here references, this flex model, right? The elasticity, the ability to flex in and out and pull those folks in as needed.
Just to add to that, I also think it's really interesting because with flex employees, you can see if there's a good relationship between the employee and the employer. Do they fit into the culture? Do they have the skills? Do they have the ability and the drive to learn what they need to learn? I feel like with today's recent we've heard of like the recent that employees are joining and quitting. They might not be even showing up to their first day of work after signing a contract, or they might be quitting right after due to the other opportunities and wage gains that they're seeing elsewhere. And so this is a contingent workers tapping into contingent workers is a great place to start for employers. So I think especially in this day and age, it might be for that reason, it's a good way to test out your talent before you hire them full time.
It's funny you mentioned the scenario where people don't show up on day one. This may be common for folks who are dialed in, but I only recently learned this. I have a client who has manipulated their time to hire calculation such that they don't consider the hire complete until the first day that person makes it through the entire first day of work. Which is, I'm sure that there are others who calculate time to hire that way as well. But that was just an aha moment for me of how big of a problem that has become, that, you know, you need to completely adjust the way that you're measuring time to hire and time to fill around it.
Right. Like it's such a huge problem that I've only been reading about. I haven't seen it firsthand at all, but I just can't believe that it's such a large problem that you would change your statistics based off of that.
All right. Well, we're not going to let anybody get out of this session without a final pop quiz. So last question here. Which best describes your contingent workforce strategy for 2023? Is it perfectly planned out? Is it a work in progress? Is it complete chaos? You don't have one maybe, or we know we need to make a strategy, but we don't know where to start, which is probably a good place to be for this session. Sonia, while folks are responding here, if contingent work is here to stay, what are the top 3 impacts to organizations that you're predicting?
So I think, like we talked about, at a time when workers are craving flexibility and autonomy, whether it's when they're working, where they're working, or how they're working, more people are leaning towards contingent work. It's a great time for organizations to tap into that talent and be able to find the talent that might be more difficult to find as full-time employees with return to mandates are happening across the board. So one, if you're able to find talent, even skilled talent in a tight labor market, that might be a good point to start. 2, since contingent workers are temporary in nature, you can easily adjust the size of your workforce in response to economic conditions without increasing your costs, such as severance pay or any of those other costs that you have, or really diminishing employee morale as well, that often come with layoffs. And 3, I think you can easily adjust your workforce as an organization according to the specific skills that you'd want and you'd need for innovating in that department or in your company as a whole, in order to compete with the market, with your industry. I think, like we talked about skills in previous slides, but I think that's really the future, and organizations will be looking at skills-based hiring. And this is a good way to tap into talent based off of skills.
All right, let's see what folks said. A work in progress, by and large.
All right.
Hopefully we'll have some help. And second runner up, we don't have one. So again, hoping that we can provide some support. The 8% who said that it's perfectly planned out, I would love to hear it. By all means, please share in the chat. We'd love to hear, where you're seeing some real success, because I'm sure that it would be incredibly helpful to folks who are still trying to navigate this somewhat new ecosystem. All right, so we never like to leave folks without some next steps and considerations. So we've provided at least 4 stepping stones for folks. In the first one here, when we say build a workforce based on today's market, we mean a market that's characterized by constant change. Elasticity in your talent strategy is going to be critical. We want to make sure that you had the flexibility to scale up and down as things expand and contract. In the second box here, shift your focus away from jobs that need to get done and towards skills gaps that need to be filled. This allows you to more narrowly pinpoint the right talent for the work ahead. And I think I mentioned this earlier, I may have jumped the gun a little bit, but I'm excited about some of the research that came out in 2022 around work without jobs. And I'm hoping to hear a lot more about this trend in 2023. The idea of focusing on the work first and the job descriptions later, if at all. I think that that's the way of the future for much more agile organizations. If your contingent strategy is going to have real legs, you have to consider the extent to which you're going to incorporate contingent workers into your organizational culture. I've hinted at a couple of my previous lives in my career. As a former consultant, I know what it feels like to spend months at a time in someone else's office building, usually in a closet with an outlet, a chair, and maybe a fluorescent light. I definitely had one of those dangling light bulbs at one point in my career. And it doesn't feel good. My favorite experience as a contractor, it was always when I was actually sitting among the client team in their, or even considered our, shared space. I actually went so far as to apply to work for one of my former clients. And that was one where, I was really among the rest of the team. So bringing your contingent workers into the fold creates a more inclusive and collaborative environment. And it's likely going to lead to better outcomes from a business perspective as well. And finally, take a look at your people management practices. I know that most of the folks on the line responded that HR is kind of holding the reins of contingent workforce, but for those where it might be distributed, where there are various parties involved, from HR to finance to procurement, are you all on the same page? Are your processes streamlined and efficient? One of my favorite mottos is, what got you here won't get you there. So there are new and better ways to manage talent holistically. Everything from AI powered tools to simply streamlining your processes on the back end. So Sonia, before we shift to Q&A, I just wanted to give you last word.
Yeah, I think you touched on this, but just to get a little bit more granular here. So I think one important thing to note is that it's more crucial than ever before that organizations educate, train, and communicate with managers who are going to be leading the hiring and managing processes for those contingent workers. And I've really seen this firsthand, but I really think it's really important to have that. Although there's worker flexibility and autonomy, but you can balance that with department goals and have clear communication as a manager who will be looking over contingent workers. And so it's best to define and document those processes with clear instructions on how they should be working, how they can be working, how they can be integrated into the culture, into the team, and how they will be evaluated as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it definitely goes back to some of those pitfalls that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It's just important to have a backup plan for those challenges, since we know them, right? You can prepare for them.
Right. Like they're going to happen. Just plan ahead for that.
All right. Well, there are a bunch of really great questions in the Q&A that I wanted to tap into. The first one this one came in pretty early, and I really love this question. Is the gig economy going to take over HR? Do you foresee that HR employees will no longer be hired and companies will hire contingent HR contractors instead, because health insurance and stuff would be cheaper, et cetera, for a company? Do you think HR employees are at future risk? My immediate gut reaction to that was, this is giving me the same vibes as when AI was first introduced, and we were worried about, are the robots going to take over? And the narrative around that question has shifted to, no, the robots are not going to take over our jobs. Instead, we're going to be doing much more human work. And I think similarly to this, I don't think there's any shortage of HR opportunities for HR professionals. I think what will be interesting will be to see the shift of more HR professionals towards those flexible and elastic arrangements that are now available to them versus exclusively full-time roles. That's my gut reaction, but Sonia, I'd love to hear what you have to say on that as well.
Yeah, similar thoughts. I'm thinking that as we see more contingent workers and companies tap into them, well, I'm also thinking that we might see more in-house. The people that stay in-house will have more of a role that's more of a talent strategist. That's more of a big picture, that has more to do with working with the CXOs of the company on bigger, larger HR policy. And then perhaps the contingent workers will be doing the HR functions that can, not in this case, a robot can do, but still a human will be able to do, but yet can be contracted out for a short term or longer term needed basis.
Yeah. So I think that do we think HR employees are at future risk? I think that, as with most things, the current context of HR is probably going to shift. And there will be new and different opportunities for HR professionals as this kind of talent ecosystem evolves. Let's see. All right, I'm going to read this one. I'm not sure where the question mark is, but let's work through it. I work for local government. We know that summer for us is when we need additional help. So we start our recruitment at around March of every year and start them working at around May. They work for no more than 6 months at a time due to local regulations, collective bargaining agreements. So there's not a question here, but I would be interested, Sonia, in your take on the government lens of contingent workers.
Yeah, so I don't think I talked about this in this webinar, but my previous jobs have been in the public service. So the last 10 years, I was working at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the federal government. And before that, I had been working for state, local government in DC. So yeah, I think that this is a common problem that we see, or a common issue that we see every summer, where there's additional help needed at certain times. Seasonal workers can be found in across industries. You see them most notably in other places like amusement parks, things of that nature, but they can really be across industries. And I think that's something that you need to tap into to get your work done. A side note, as an economist, I'm just going to throw out another stat here, but Friday's jobs numbers also showed that the temporary workers had increased by, I think, 26,000 over January. So what that really means is that it's a leading indicator for contingent workers. It's temporary help workers, or broadly, they also encompass gig workers, seasonal workers, all of that. But basically that just says that we're likely to see the job market stay strong for the future, and it's a leading indicator for that. So our estimates, as well as HR.com's estimates of the contingent worker workforce growing in the future, it also supports that. So I added my own little touch to that question, but yeah.
Well, Kathy, I understand there are a few other questions that I don't have access to. So if you wouldn't mind sharing those, that'd be great.
Certainly. These questions came in from our attendees when they registered for your session. So you may have covered some of these, but I will read them out. How do you convince stakeholders to consider hiring contingent workers rather than strictly focusing on full-time roles?
Sonia, you want to take the first stab?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking maybe our slideshow and this recording will help them convince them, even if it's just a little bit. But really, I think there are so many positives with contingent workers. Again, if you are a smaller company and you don't have the bandwidth or the funds to hire full-time employees, you can tap into contingent workers and still get that work done. This is a time when you need to be innovative compared to your peers, compared to your competition, compared to the rest of your industry. And I think it's really important to have to not be left behind and focus on your skills. And the best way to do that on a short-term basis is contingent workers. And like I said also before, it's a great way to test out if these are going to be good employees, right? It's a short term. It can be a 3, 6, 9 month stint, and you can see how they work. Do they fit with the team? Do they fit with the culture? Are they driven and motivated? And do you want them on a team as a manager? So I think for many reasons, it would be a win-win if you present it like that to your senior management.
Couldn't
Thank
agree
you.
more. I think part of it is the clincher for me, I guess, because we work in like the technology and innovation space, but the idea that it's a low stakes way to continue to contribute to your innovation strategy, I think is just really critical.
Thank you. Another question here. As contractors or freelancers finish projects, how can you make sure their knowledge and expertise is not lost when they leave the organization?
Well, as a former contractor, I would say the scenarios where this went the best for us was where the contracting organization had a knowledge transfer process and a very robust knowledge management system. Obviously, robust is not available to everybody, but I think there's just some common sense practices that can be put into place in terms of the offboarding process. And step one is just having an offboarding process, right? Like leave the time, set aside the time and the resources to be able to execute offboarding. Make sure that there's, several days worth of transfer that's happening, if not weeks, and having in place the appropriate technical locations for any sort of deliverables work product to be stored, including any sort of notes that need to go along with that to kind of explain the reasoning and rationale behind the work that was completed and the work that was done. I find that oftentimes contractors come in and a lot of the work that they're responsible for is really more from a strategic perspective of getting things in place prior to execution. Of course, there are some execution contractors as well, but in a world in which the work is predominantly on the strategy setting end of the spectrum, it's really important that the folks who are full-time employees and on the hook for executing the strategy are fully aware of and bought into the work that needs to be done moving forward once those contractors disappear and move on to their next gig. Anything to add there, Sonia?
One other thing, in addition to, I think, documenting your processes and writing down any knowledge transfer, creating any knowledge transfer documents that you can pass on to the next person. I think another great idea that I just came up with recently this week, actually, as I'm thinking about this myself, is an actual Zoom recorded session where you go through, where the employee goes through what they were doing, how they were, in my case, pulling data, what they did with the data, how did they actually write those scripts, and what you can do to replicate this work. So I think Zoom has this amazing recording feature that another person can watch and see at their own time whenever they do join. So that was just a tangible way to do it.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. For positions that require specialized skills, are there any resources or talent pools of contingent talent to pull from for skilled labor?
I think that's why we encourage organizations to create such an extensive talent network, right? Keeping track of I struggle with the correct terminology for this because I know there are a couple of different camps out there, but your silver medalists or your podium candidates from the past who maybe were not selected for a role that also had niche requirements, making sure you have systems and tools in place that help you keep track of those talent pools allows you to kind of forego the need for a third party or a vendor to help you sort through those skills requirements and to identify talent. You then have it available to at your fingertips on demand. So creating that extensive external talent network is what's going to help you kind of minimize the costs associated with working with a third party and get around any sort of additional specialized help you might need to identify that specialized talent. Sonia, anything to add?
No, I think you covered it. Great idea. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you both. Do you have either of you have any final closing remarks before we close off today?
Please feel free to reach out. We really enjoyed this conversation and look forward to future conversations.
Yep, same. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. This concludes our webcast today. I would like to thank both our presenters as well as all of you for joining us. If you joined late and would like to view the webcast again, the recording and slides will be available on hr.com on our archived webcast page. If you're looking for your educational credits, those will show up in your account within 2 business days, and we also send out an email with the credit information. Please take a few moments and fill out the webcast survey that will open on your screen. Your feedback is very important to us. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of the event.